Here is another quick video from my trip to Houston. After visiting Main Street via the Metro Light Rail system, I drove to the George Bush International Airport to ride the subway. This is an old, clunky, cramped, and absolutely wonderful little people mover that connects the various terminals of the airport on the unsecured side. There is a much newer and nicer elevated train for the secured side, which I didn't get to ride, but the family member who I was picking up did. As you can see, it is a fairly typical people mover design seen in many airports, and there isn't much to say about it. The subway, however, is entirely unique. It was built by none other than the Walt Disney Company, based on their Wedway people mover in Florida. The abandoned Wedway mover in California was different. This system is the absolute epitome of a smart track, dumb train design philosophy. The trains are completely unpowered. They are literally nothing more than wheels and passenger compartments. Everything from propulsion, lighting, climate, announcements, and door openings are handled by the track. To make the trains move, there are these little pods along the track containing linear induction motors. When they are powered, they act like magnets that force the train to start, stop, cruise, or hold still. You can see how more pods are placed in areas where the trains need to accelerate or decelerate. Lighting and climate controls are provided by the basement in which the trains operate, and speakers along the ceiling make announcements directly into the train through the roof, which is nothing more than a mesh screen. Finally, the doors of the train are pulled open and closed by a clever latch on the inside of the platform screen doors, just like elevator doors. This is not the way transportation systems are designed today. More and more, things are trending in the smart vehicle, dumb infrastructure direction, meaning that more and more of the computational and mechanical complexity is placed on the vehicles, and less intelligence needs to be built into the road, track, or stations. In the 1960s, when the subway was first designed, computers were large, complicated machines that needed to be housed in large rooms or buildings of their own. If you wanted a completely automatic train system, it made sense to put all the computer-controlled functions along the track, where they could be more easily linked to the stationary computer. Half a century later, computers have become so compact that it is crazy not to put them on the vehicles. Most systems rely on a mix of a central computer and individual on-board computers talking to one another, but future systems are trending toward an extreme in the other direction, where each on-board computer becomes so intelligent that no central computer will be needed, leaving the trains to coordinate with each other on the best way to co-operate their system. These fully autonomous trains will no longer need things like line-side signals or fixed block separation, because they will be fully aware of all other trains' locations at all times, just like autonomous automobiles. Such statements may seem crazy to us today, but to tell any of the original designers of the Houston subway that their space-age automatic train system is built on an incorrect design philosophy would also earn you some strange looks. Technologies change, and design philosophies change with them. Also changing are the corporations that construct such systems. Disney may seem like an odd choice to build an airport people mover, but for a little while, in the 1960s and 70s, there was a semi-serious push by the Disney Company to use or license their technology for real-world transit applications. This goes back to Walt Disney himself, who, more than being an entertainer or businessman, was, at heart, a technologist. As a teenager, he wasn't satisfied with drawing static cartoons. He wanted to be in animation. Unable to make a name for himself with silent technologies of his day, he bet his fortune on adding sound and music, creating the runaway success of Mickey Mouse. His was among the first studios to add color, and in his efforts to make his films as realistic and immersive as possible, he and his employees created new technologies, such as the multiplane camera or the stereo sound system. His 8th feature film, Victory Through Air Power, was an unsolicited propaganda documentary about how advancing aviation technology could end wars without messy and costly land-based invasions. His Disneyland TV show is credited with popularizing ideas such as human spaceflight and bringing Wernher von Braun into the public spotlight long before the space race with the Soviet Union. And, of course, most famously, he used Disneyland as a sandbox to test and popularize new technologies such as audio animatronics, people movers, and, my personal favorite, monorails. It cannot be overstated how antiquated elevated trains seemed in the 1950s. We may think of them as charming now, but in the 1950s they were actively being torn down across the country, including in New York, Boston, and California. Enormous steel structures crowded the streets and blocked out the light, not to mention all the noise of passing trains and regular maintenance. Monorails were meant to solve all these problems by applying new roadway and aviation technologies to trains. Instead of clanking steel wheels and steel rails, monorails would use rubber tires on concrete beams, which is much quieter and means that, because the tires wear out faster than the concrete, the tracks almost never need to be replaced, unlike steel-railed systems. It also meant that monorails can accelerate and decelerate faster, as well as climb steeper hills than steel-wheeled vehicles, which is the same reason why you see some entire metro lines in Canada and France using rubber-tired metro trains. Most importantly, by running directly on the concrete beams instead of building additional track on top of those beams, the elevated structure could be reduced from a horrible tangle of steel supports to a simple, elegant guideway, which lets in more light and does not constrain traffic nearly so much. These guideways could be further reduced in size by taking advantage of newer, lightweight materials and construction in the trains. When I worked at the Walt Disney World monorail system as one of their pilots, there were some old hands who had driven the original Mark IV trains and still referred to the current Mark VI trains as Tupperwares, since those trains rely so much on plastics and fiberglass for their structure instead of traditional metal. Disney was so convinced of the potential for monorails that he based the entire layout of his Florida project on a single monorail line from a never-constructed airport through an entrance complex, an industrial park, the city of Epcot, and then on to the theme park, which was sort of an afterthought by that point. What he really wanted was to make real change in the real world, and he was going to use Epcot to showcase just how cities could be built differently. Cars and sprawl had their place, but in the urban core, cars and trucks were moved to their own subterranean levels, while monorails and people movers soared above in the air, leaving ground level entirely free for pedestrians. But such a future was not to be. Cigarettes, his old habit of dealing with the enormous amounts of stress he carried, killed him when he was only 65, before a single structure in Florida broke ground. The company he left behind retreated from the front lines of urban design and fell back to the profitable business they already knew, mainly theme parks and feature films. There are still some last artifacts of his former ambitions left in his wake. The TTC monorail station is intentionally plain and utilitarian, showcasing what a suburban monorail station could look like in your community. There is also this pamphlet, released by the short-lived Disney subsidiary Community Transportation Services in 1979, in an attempt to sell their Mark IV monorail platform to cities as a general public transit system. This was about the same time that the Walt Disney Company got involved in the Houston subway. Even though there were no takers at this time, 2 used Mark IV monorail trains were used to start the Las Vegas monorail, and Bombardier's involvement with the Mark VI trains eventually led to their Innovia monorail design, which is used around the world, from Brazil to Thailand, with several systems currently under construction. Now, YouTube is full of talking heads trying to persuade you that monorails are not serious transit, or that they are Gadgetbahns, or even outright scams. All of this foolishness ignores the many very successful monorail lines around the world in the Middle East, China, Japan, and South America. The real reason we don't see more monorails in North America is not because they are inferior or even technically flawed in some way, but because North America just does not have the massive dispersed density of a Tokyo or Sao Paulo or other world cities where monorails are doing just fine. These systems are generally built bigger than anything in North America and are treated as legitimate pieces of a complete public transit system. Our most infamous monorails were either built tiny in order to save on costs, or were shunned as niche tourist attractions instead of legitimate transit solutions. Some of this is probably caused, ironically, because of Disney's early involvement in the technology, leading most people here to associate monorails with tiny trains and theme parks. The best example of a useful public monorail in North America is probably Seattle, which runs a 1-mile line between the Westlake Transit Center in downtown and the Seattle Center, where the famous Space Needle and Sports Arena are located. It was originally constructed for the World's Fair in 1962 and spent many decades afterwards languishing in uncertainty and various attempts at private, for-profit tourist operation. But in 2019, the monorail was finally integrated with existing public transit, including fare integration, allowing passengers to transfer easily from the subterranean light rail to monorail via a simple elevator ride. When I last rode this line in 2023, trains ran every 5 minutes and were filled with hockey fans. It is interesting to compare the monorail with the adjacent South Lake Union streetcar, which also stops at the Westlake Transit Center and which is also about 1 mile long. While the streetcar carries about 500,000 passengers per year and takes 10 minutes to go end to end, the monorail carries 1.5 million passengers a year, or 3 times that of the streetcar, and takes less than a minute to go end to end. Both systems provide valuable services, and Seattle is better off with this kind of transit diversity. But as a monorail enthusiast, I love to see the Alweg trains go flying over traffic at 45 miles per hour while the streetcars plod along in traffic. If there is a point to this video, it is that unique systems that are often denigrated as being Gadgetbahns do have their place and can be very successful if properly implemented. The future for the Houston subway is not looking bright, as the airport is looking to replace it with something more conventional in the near future. I personally hope that they do not, as this quirky Disney creation is perfectly suited for this odd application, and it represents a design philosophy and history that are not present in modern conventional designs. If you are a Disney-phile or a transit aficionado and you are ever in Houston, I highly recommend you check out this train while you still can. I'm Christian Lenhart. Thank you for watching.